The world doesn't just run on money, it runs on power. Richard Sterling thought he had both. He was a self-made millionaire, and he'd just traded in his quiet, elegant wife Elara for a superstar model. He was on top of the world, flaunting his new life in the $80 million oceanfront mansion he'd built as his monument. But Richard made one fatal mistake. He thought his wife's family was just old news. He forgot that while millionaires build houses, dynasties build empires, and they can tear them down just as easily. The Southampton air was different. It wasn't just clean, salt-tinged air. It was, as Richard Sterling liked to say, filtered by wealth. And his new home, a towering structure of glass, white marble, and reclaimed Brazilian teak, was the filter. He called it the Sterling Point, a 15,000-square-foot behemoth that jutted out over the dunes, defying the very ocean it overlooked. It was a house built not for comfort, but for page 6. Tonight it was performing its function perfectly. The terrace was packed with a curated slice of New York's elite. Tech billionaires clinked glasses with fashion editors. A U.S. senator was laughing too loudly by the infinity pool. And at the center of it all, holding court, was Richard. "It's not just a house," he was booming his voice, a practiced baritone that carried over the lounge music. He wore a custom Brioni suit, unbuttoned, no tie. "It's a statement. You don't buy a view like this. You earn it." His wife Elara stood near the edge of the terrace, holding a glass of Sancerre she hadn't sipped. She was watching him, not with the adoration he craved, but with the quiet, anthropological curiosity she usually reserved for the 17th century Dutch paintings she curated. Elara was a Vance. The Vances didn't make statements. They were the statement. They owned the banks that held the loans for the buildings that men like Richard built. They owned the land under the museums. They were a dynasty, and Elara was their quiet, almost forgotten scion. She wore a simple sleeveless navy dress by the row. Her only jewelry was a thin platinum watch, her grandmother's. She was, as Richard often complained, aggressively understated. "He's impressive, your husband." A voice slid in next to her. Elara turned. It was Isabella Monet. The Isabella Monet. The 22-year-old face of Gucci Prada and 1,000 magazine covers. She was 6 feet tall before heels poured into a metallic gold dress that seemed sprayed onto her skin. She was an event, a spectacle. "Richard is driven," Elara replied, her voice soft. "Driven. He's a hurricane." Isabella laughed, her eyes scanning the crowd. "He wants everyone to look at him. And you just want to disappear, don't you?" Elara felt a cold prickle. "I'm not here to be looked at. I'm here to support Richard." "That's sweet." Isabella's smile was a perfect white carnivorous thing. "But honey, in this world, if you're not being looked at, you're invisible. And if you're invisible..." She let the sentence hang, taking a long, slow drag from a forbidden cigarette. Her eyes weren't on Elara. They were on Richard, who had just spotted her. He broke off his conversation mid-sentence, his politician's smile shifting into something more primal. He began to move through the crowd toward them, a shark sensing blood. "Elara, darling," he said, arriving and placing a possessive hand on the small of her back. But his eyes devoured Isabella. "I see you've met the guest of honor. Isabella, you made it." "Richard, what a house," Isabella purred, touching his lapel. "It's so big." "I build things to last," he said, his chest puffing out. "Do you?" Isabella's gaze flicked to Elara, then back to Richard. Elara watched the exchange. It was so blatant, so lacking in subtlety, that it was almost boring. This was not the discreet old-world infidelity she'd been raised to expect. This was a hostile takeover. "Richard," Elara said, her voice cutting through their little bubble. "Mrs. Vanderbilt is leaving. You need to say goodbye." Richard's face tightened. He hated being reminded of social niceties. He hated for a split second that Elara was better at this than he was. "Right, of course." He nodded curtly at Isabella. "Don't go far." As he walked away, Isabella turned to Elara. "He's amazing. A real man. Not like those bony boys from your world, the ones who look like they've never seen the sun." "My world?" Elara asked. "Oh, come on." "The Vances, the Dynasty," Isabella said with a mock reverent tone. "All that dusty old money, all those rules. Don't you ever just want to scream, buy something tacky, live a little?" "My family values privacy," Elara said, finally, taking a sip of her wine. "Privacy is just a word for people who are afraid to be famous," Isabella replied. "Richard isn't afraid. He's building an empire. I'm just here to be his empress." The words hung in the air. His empress. Not an empress. Elara looked at the 22-year-old, a girl who had mistaken fame for power and attention for respect. Then she looked at her husband, a man who had mistaken his millions for her family's billions. "Well," Elara said, setting her glass down, "the job is open." She walked away, leaving Isabella momentarily speechless. Elara moved through the party, a ghost in navy blue, navigating the groups of people who were all there to worship at the altar of Richard Sterling. She knew with a certainty that settled like a stone in her stomach that her marriage was over. Richard hadn't just built a house. He had built a monument to his own ego, and she knew better than anyone that monuments could be torn down. The party was a grotesque success. It was written up in Vogue Tatler, and most importantly, to Richard Forbes. The headline was, "The New King of the Hamptons, Richard Sterling's $80 million statement." 2 weeks later, the smell of victory and Isabella's Frederick Malle perfume was still clinging to the curtains in the master bedroom when Richard finally delivered the blow. He didn't do it with shame. He did it with pride. "Elara, we need to talk," he said, straightening the knot of his Hermes tie in the reflection of the floor-to-ceiling glass wall that overlooked the Atlantic. It was 7 a.m. He was already dressed for war. Elara was in the adjoining dressing room, a massive custom-built space he'd designed lining up her shoes. She preferred her simple Repetto flats. He had tried and failed to get her into Christian Louboutin stilettos. "Are we?" she asked, not looking at him. She placed a pair of beige flats into their slot. "I'm not happy. I haven't been happy for a long time," he announced, as if reading from a script. "You're a wonderful woman, Elara. Your class, your elegance. But I'm not that man anymore. I'm not quiet." "I've never known you to be quiet, Richard," she said, her voice dry. He ignored her. "I'm a builder. I'm a creator. I need passion. I need fire. I need someone who sees me, not just my bank account." This was the line that finally made her stop and turn. The absurdity of it was breathtaking. She, Elara Vance, whose family trust fund could buy and sell Sterling properties 10 times over without noticing the transaction fee, was being accused of being a gold digger. "And you found that fire?" she asked. Yes, with Isabella. He said her name with a flourish. She's alive. She understands the drive. She wants to build this empire with me. I see. Elara walked past him and sat on the edge of the bed, a vast, custom-made platform that Richard had boasted was earthquake-proof. She looked small against its imported suede headboard. "So I'm leaving you," he said. "I'm in love with her, and she's in love with me." "And the house?" Elara asked, her gaze drifting to the ocean. Richard's face hardened. This was the part he had rehearsed. This was the negotiation. "The house is mine, Elara. I designed it. I built it. My name is on the company that holds the deed. It's a non-marital asset. My lawyers have been very clear on that." "I'm not talking about the deed, Richard. I'm talking about the statement." "It's my statement," he snapped, his insecurity flaring. "And I'm not going to be bled dry by you. I know how this works. You with your quiet, judgmental family. You'll try to take half. Well, it's not happening." He began to pace, his adrenaline pumping. "I'll be generous, of course. I'm not a monster. I'll let you keep the apartment in the city." Elara had to suppress a laugh. The apartment was a 10-room pre-war masterpiece on Park Avenue that had been in her family since 1926. It was currently loaned to the French consulate. The apartment she lived in with Richard was a penthouse in Tribeca, also his. "Richard," she said, standing up, "I want nothing from you." He stopped pacing. "What? I said I want nothing. Not your apartment, not your art, which is frankly terrible, and certainly not this." She gestured around the cavernous, cold bedroom. "I want my clothes, my books, and my grandmother's desk. That's all." Richard was thrown. This wasn't in the script. He was prepared for a fight, for tears, for screaming. He was not prepared for indifference. It enraged him. You can't be serious," he stammered. "What will you do? Where will you go? Run back to your dusty old uncle? My dusty old uncle, as you call him, is Julian Vance. And yes, I'll be staying at the family home on 72nd Street until my own place is prepared." "Your own place? What place I've been paying for your life for 10 years. "Elara," he shouted. This was his truth, the one he had constructed. He, the self-made man, had rescued her from a boring life of inherited privilege. Elara finally looked at him, and for the first time, Richard saw the Vance in her eyes. It wasn't fire. It was ice. "Richard, do you have any idea who I am?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "You married a Vance. You were so blinded by the prestige of the name that you never once bothered to look at the ledger. You think you have money, you have debt, you have leverage, you have a brand built on perception. My family, we have assets. We don't build houses on sand, Richard. We own the sand." He was stunned into silence. "You've been, what, tolerating me?" He whispered, the insult landing like a physical blow. "I've been amused by you," she corrected. "But the amusement has worn off. You've become a cliché, a middle-aged man leaving his wife for a model. It's so boring." She walked back into the dressing room. He heard the metallic snick of suitcase latches. "You can't talk to me like that," he roared, following her. "I am Richard Sterling. I built this." "You did?" She agreed, placing a stack of folded cashmere sweaters into a Goyard trunk. "And you will be left with it." I'll ruin you," he threatened, but it sounded weak, childish. "I'll tell page 6 you're a cold, frigid snob." "You'll tell page 6 whatever your new publicist, the one Isabella recommends, tells you to say. It will be a conscious uncoupling, and you will spin it as you being incredibly generous to your estranged wife." "I know the game, Richard. Frankly, I'm relieved I no longer have to play." She zipped the trunk. A car, a discreet black Mercedes S-Class, that was not one of Richard's fleet of Rolls-Royces, was already crunching up the gravel driveway. "You'll regret this, Ilara," he said, his voice cracking. She paused at the door, her trunks already being handled by a driver who looked more like a security agent. "No, Richard, you will." She walked out of the $80 million mansion without a single look back. Richard Sterling stood alone in his glass cathedral, the silence of the house suddenly deafening. He had his mansion, his model, and his empire. He had never felt so small. The divorce proceedings were surgically fast. Just as Ilara had predicted, Richard's team, led by the infamously theatrical divorce lawyer Marty the Shark Klein, was prepared for a war of attrition. Marty, a man who wore diamond pinky rings and snakeskin boots, swaggered into the first and only meeting. Ilara was represented by Mr. Harrison, a man in his late 70s, who wore a perpetually disappointed expression and a suit that was probably older than Marty. Harrison's firm had handled the Vance family's affairs since the Roosevelt administration. "Look, Harrison," Marty began, tossing a Mont Blanc pen on the table. "Richard is a very generous man. He's willing to offer, let's call it, a golden parachute. A lump sum, say $5 million. Plus she keeps her baubles. In exchange, a full NDA, and she waives all future claims to Sterling properties, marital or otherwise." Mr. Harrison slowly put on his reading glasses. He looked at the paper Marty had slid across the table as if it were something unpleasant he'd found on his shoe. "Mr. Klein," Harrison said, his voice a dry rustle. "My client, Ms. Vance." "Mrs. Sterling," Marty corrected. "Ms. Vance," Harrison repeated with a flicker of steel, "has no interest in Mr. Sterling's generosity. She has, in fact, prepared her own terms." He slid a single sheet of vellum paper across the table. Marty scanned it, his cigar-chomping bravado faltering. He read it again. This is it," he stammered. "A list of furniture, a desk and 12 paintings. She wants no alimony, no stake in the company, no cash settlement. Ms. Vance is not in need of a settlement, Mr. Klein. She simply wants her personal property, which I might add was on loan to the marital home. The paintings are from her private collection. The desk belonged to her great-grandmother." Marty, for the first time in his career, was speechless. He'd come expecting to battle over hedge funds, offshore accounts, and the Southampton property. Instead, he was negotiating over a piece of antique furniture. "But the house," Marty said, recovering. "Richard built it, but she lived there. Community property, we could argue." "You could," Harrison interrupted. "And you would lose. The asset is held by Sterling Point, LLC, a Delaware corporation of which Mr. Sterling is the sole managing partner. It was never co-mingled. My client has no interest in it. She finds the property, and I quote, ostentatiously drafty." Marty was defeated. It was the easiest multi-million-dollar divorce of his life, and it felt like a total loss. He had no leverage. He couldn't even threaten them. "Fine," Marty snapped. "We'll sign." The story hit page 6 48 hours later. Sterling's solo act. Richard Sterling and Ilara Vance split. Sources say the property mogul was incredibly generous as model Isabella Monet moves in. Richard hated that they used her maiden name. He and Isabella were photographed a week later, kissing on a yacht in St. Bart's. Isabella had moved into the Sterling Point and immediately begun her reign. Her first act was to hire a new, trendy interior designer. "This place is so cold," she complained, running her hand over the minimalist Italian marble. "It needs life. It needs me." Elara's muted museum-quality neutrals were ripped out. Walls were painted a glittering, textured gold. Animal print rugs were thrown over the white oak floors. A 20-foot-tall portrait of Isabella nude and draped in vulgari snakes was commissioned for the main atrium. Richard, high on the fumes of his new life, approved every expense. The redecoration cost $3 million. The parties were constant. Dom Perignon flowed not by the bottle in their circles, but by the case. Isabella's friends, a flock of influencers, models and DJs, descended on the house every weekend, documenting every vulgar detail for their millions of followers. "See," Richard would say to his own reflection, his pupils slightly dilated, "this is life. This is passion." Meanwhile, Elara Vance had disappeared. Or rather, she had returned to her world. She'd taken up residence in her family's 6-story limestone townhouse on East 72nd Street, a fortress of quiet old-world power. She wasn't mourning. She was working. Her days were spent in the climate-controlled archives of her family's private art foundation. She was planning, not revenge. Revenge was so messy. Elara was planning a correction, a market adjustment. She had lunch with her uncle Julian Vance at Le Bernardin. Julian was a man who spoke in whispers, but whose words could destabilize governments. He was the patriarch, the true head of the Vance dynasty. "You're well, Elara?" he asked, tasting his wine. "I'm very well, Uncle Julian." "This person, Sterling, he was indiscreet. He was disrespectful. To you and, by extension, to this family. He's a product of his time," Elara said. "He believes his own press. And Page 6 is a poor substitute for the Wall Street Journal," Julian noted. "He's over-leveraged. His new Dubai project is ambitious. Ambitious. He's financed it with junk bonds and handshake deals with questionable partners," Julian said. "He needs a massive infusion of capital in the next 6 months or the entire tower of cards collapses." Elara was silent, sipping her water. "He's exposed," Julian continued. "He thinks that house in Southampton is his fortress. He doesn't realize it's his primary liability. The upkeep alone is astronomical, and his new companion has famously expensive taste." "She does," Elara agreed. "A man who builds his house on sand," Julian mused. "Sooner or later the tide comes in. Tell me, Elara, that house, did you ever like it?" Elara thought for a moment. "I liked the view. The land is significant. The house itself is an insult to architecture." Julian Vance nodded slowly, a small, cold smile touching his lips. "Significant land? Yes, it is." He signaled for the check. "I'm glad you're back, Elara. It's time to get back to the family business." The next 6 months were a blur of golden, glorious, expensive chaos for Richard Sterling. Life with Isabella was a non-stop performance. It was fashion weeks in Milan, F1 in Monaco, and impromptu trips to Tokyo to buy rare Rolex watches. Richard was funding a lifestyle not just for one person, but for Isabella's entire 15-person entourage. You have to spend money to make money. baby," she'd shout over the music in a club, ordering another $25,000 bottle of Ace of Spades, champagne, to be sprayed over the crowd. Richard, caught in the undertow of her youth and fame, would just laugh and sign the bill. But back in New York, the numbers weren't working. The Sterling Tower in Dubai, his legacy project, was in trouble. He was at his desk in his sleek Manhattan office, a glass box overlooking Central Park. His assistant, Greg, a nervous young man who lived in terror of him, was reading the latest report. "Sir, the Al-Jamil family. They've pulled their second-round funding," Greg stammered, afraid to make eye contact. "What pulled it?" "Pulled it. They promised me that 200 million. I had dinner with the sheikh." Richard roared, slamming his fist on his desk. They said they were re-evaluating their international real estate exposure. Sir, their banker. It's the Vance Trust." Richard froze. Vance. What the hell does Ilara's dusty old family have to do with my Dubai deal? They don't, exactly. But the Vance Trust holds the note on the Al-Jamil family's London properties. The word is the Vances advised them to pull back from high-risk developments. High risk, I'm high risk. Richard was vibrating with rage. I'm Richard Sterling. I'm the safest bet in the world. Sir, without that 200 million, we can't make the next construction payment. The entire project will halt. The penalty clauses are staggering. "Get me a loan," Richard shouted. "Call Goldman. Call JP Morgan. Use the Sterling point as collateral. It's worth 80 million easy. I'll get 40 million by tomorrow." Greg looked even sicker. "Sir, I tried. Both banks. They've declined. Declined. My credit is flawless. They said the asset is too specialized, a single-owner trophy home. They said its valuation is subjective. And, sir, our company's debt-to-liquid asset ratio is too high. Too high. It's high because I'm building things you can't build without debt." But he knew what it meant. The banks were spooked. That dusty old Vance name, whispered in the right boardroom, carried more weight than all his Forbes covers combined. The Vances didn't have to do anything. They just had to suggest. They were the house, and he was just a gambler on a losing streak. He flew back to Southampton that night in his helicopter, his stomach in knots. He was $200 million short. He was burning through his personal cash at a rate of $1 million a week just to keep Isabella happy. He landed on the helipad of his mansion to find a full-scale rave in progress. A famous DJ was set up by the pool. There were at least 300 people on his lawn. He stormed into the house, finding Isabella dancing on a custom-made marble table, a magnum of tequila in her hand. "Isabella! What the hell is this?" he screamed, grabbing her arm. "It's a party, baby. Lighten up," she shrieked, clearly drunk. "I'm celebrating my new Vogue cover. I don't care about your damn cover. We have to stop this, the spending, all these leeches." He gestured at her friends. Isabella's face turned from joy to a cold reptilian fury in an instant. She jumped off the table. "Leeches. These are my friends. This is my career. This is the life you promised me. Don't you dare come in here and try to be boring. Don't be her hurt Ilara. Your boring, frigid old wife. Is that what you want? To go back to her because I can be on a plane to Paris in an hour. Richard, there are a dozen billionaires who would beg to pay for my parties." The threat was clear. The passion and fire he'd left his wife for was entirely conditional. It was a transaction. He was paying for the experience of being with Isabella Monet, and he had just missed a payment. No baby, of course. Not. He stammered, his anger deflating into panic. He couldn't lose her. Not now. Losing her would be a public admission that he'd failed. It would be the final humiliation. I'm just stressed. The Dubai project. Ugh, business. She scoffed, rolling her eyes. Don't be so needy, Richard. Go get a drink. She turned her back on him and cranked the music louder. Richard stood there, invisible in his own home, surrounded by strangers, the music pulsing like a migraine. He was hemorrhaging money from every direction. The $80 million mansion suddenly felt like a tomb. He had to get liquid. He had to get it now. Greg, he barked into his phone, walking to a quiet corner of the estate. Put the house on the market. Tomorrow. Sir. The Sterling Point. Yes. Are you deaf? But be discreet. I don't want a for sale sign. I want an off-market listing. Target Russian oligarchs, Chinese billionaires, someone who wants a trophy and will pay cash. Price $85 million. Not a penny less. He hung up. He looked at the house, lit up against the night sky, pulsing with music he hated. It was his greatest triumph, and now he had to sell it to pay for the supermodel who was ignoring him. The irony was so bitter he could barely breathe. Elara Vance, meanwhile, was having a renaissance. She had done something no Vance had done in 50 years. She'd opened a public-facing business. It was a small 3-story gallery in Chelsea called Vance Contemporary. It was an instant, staggering success. Not because it was flashy, but because it was the opposite. The opening night featured no celebrities, no DJs, no paparazzi. It featured 4 unknown painters, a string quartet playing Shostakovich and Elara herself in a simple black dress passionately explaining the brushwork of a young artist from Belgium. The New York Times art critic, a notoriously difficult man named Harrison Dubois, wrote a 2-page spread. For years, he wrote, "Art has become a commodity, a plaything for the new money investor." With Vance Contemporary, Elara. Vance has done the impossible. She has made art again. She is without question the most important new voice in the art world. She has the one thing the market flippers lack: taste. Collectors' museums and old money patrons flocked to her. She was the new arbiter of class. In leaving Richard, she hadn't become invisible. She had become essential. She was photographed at museum galas, not as a +1, but as the guest of honor. Richard saw the articles. He saw the pictures of Elara looking serene, intelligent, and powerful, surrounded by people who wouldn't return his calls. He'd scroll through them, his knuckles white, then switch to Isabella's Instagram, which was full of selfies in bikinis and videos of her drunk at 3 a.m. He had traded a Rolex for a Swatch, and the world knew it. His professional life was unraveling just as fast. The listing for the Sterling Point was a disaster. The discreet off-market offering had of course been leaked to the New York Post. Sterling's point of no return. Mogul's $85 billion palace on the block as Dubai project stalls. The story cast a pall over his company. Suddenly contractors were demanding payment up front. Lenders were calling in minor debts, the sharks were circling, and the house wouldn't sell. "What do you mean, no offers?" Richard bellowed at the high-end broker. "It's the most famous house in the Hamptons." "Famous, yes," the broker, a sleek woman named Samantha said coolly. "But it's a very specific taste, Richard. The gold leaf walls, the nightclub-grade sound system. It's not what the current market wants. The current market wants, well, frankly, they want what Elara Vance has. Quiet, timeless, old-world charm." "It's a monument," he insisted. "Monuments are for history books. People want homes." He was trapped. He couldn't lower the price. It would be an admission of desperation. He couldn't not sell because the Dubai penalties were mounting, and Isabella had just discovered a passion for haute couture gowns, which she wore once and then discarded. He was sitting in his office, his head in his hands, when Greg knocked. "Sir, there's an offer. On the house." Richard shot up. How much was it, the Russian?" "No, sir. It's an LLC, a domestic corporation based in Delaware. It's called Arrowhead Holdings." "Arrowhead, never heard of them. What's the offer?" They're offering full asking price, $85 million. Richard stared. "Full asking in this market?" "Yes, sir. And—" Greg paused, checking the paper. "All cash. They waive all inspections, and they want to close in 10 days. It was a miracle, a lifeline. He was saved. "Take it," Richard yelled. "Take it. I don't care if it's the cartel. Draft the papers. Get it done. Now." "Yes, sir," Greg scrambled out. Richard poured himself a massive glass of Macallan 25. He was back. He was Richard Sterling. He'd done it again. He'd stared into the abyss, and he hadn't blinked. He picked up his phone to call Isabella to tell her they were going to celebrate. She didn't answer. Her Instagram story showed she was in Paris at a fitting at the Chanel atelier. "Oops," the caption read. A picture of a $100,000 dress was next. He didn't even care. He was $85 million richer. He could pay for the dress. He could fund Dubai. He was back. The closing was set for the following Friday. Richard, in his arrogance, planned one last "fuck you" party at the mansion for the night before. He would drain the cellars, trash the place, and hand the keys to the anonymous buyers in the morning. Elara heard the news from her uncle. "Arrowhead Holdings has an accepted offer," Julian said over the phone. He was at his desk looking at a painting of a naval battle. "Is it done then?" Elara asked. She was at her own gallery, prepping for a new show. "Almost. The rat has taken the cheese," Julian said. "He's planning a party, a final desecration. I think it's time to finalize the transaction. Publicly." "What do you mean? The house is yours, my dear. Or rather, it's the foundation's. I thought you might like to be there for the final walkthrough. After all, you have to accept the keys." A slow smile spread across Elara's face. "Uncle Julian, you are a menace." "I am a Vance, Elara. As are you. We protect our own. And we tidy up. I'll send a car for you on Friday. 10 a.m. Wear something appropriate." The party was apocalyptic. Richard, flush with the impending $85 million, had decided to burn the house to the ground, metaphorically. He flew in Tiesto to DJ. He hired the entire staff of Nobu to cater. He told Isabella to invite everyone, and she did. By 3 a.m., the house was a wreck. A rented Lamborghini was in the infinity pool. The new animal print carpets were stained with wine and ash. Someone had inexplicably spray-painted Isabella's palace on the white marble wall of the atrium. Richard didn't care. He was drunk, victorious, and surrounded by beautiful, shallow people. He felt like a Roman emperor. "To me," he toasted, standing on the bar, champagne pouring down his shirt. To Richard F. King Sterling. To Richard, they all screamed back, none of them knowing or caring that he was a hair's breadth from total bankruptcy. When the sun rose, the scene was one of utter devastation. The staff, paid triple, were trying to scrub the evidence away. Richard was passed out in a cabana. Isabella was long gone, having left with a musician for an after-party. At 9 a.m., Greg, his eyes twitching, had to physically shake his boss awake. Sir, the buyers. They're here. The final walkthrough is at 10 a.m. Ugh. What? Richard sat up, his head splitting. They're here. Why so early? It's 10 a.m., sir. As scheduled. Fine. Richard splashed water on his face, put on a pair of sunglasses, and swallowed 4 aspirin. He was still in his tuxedo from the night before. Let's get this over with. Give me the keys. I'll meet them. Get the check, and we're gone. He stumbled out onto the grand driveway, which was littered with confetti and broken glass. He saw a car approaching, but it wasn't the Maybach or Rolls-Royce he expected from a billionaire buyer. It was a 1960s Bentley S2 Continental, a quiet, elegant, old money car, painted a discreet shade of dark green. It crunched to a halt. A driver in a simple black suit got out and opened the rear door. Out stepped Mr. Harrison, his ancient, judgmental lawyer. Harrison, Richard barked, confused. What the hell are you doing here? Mr. Sterling, Harrison said, with a sniff of disdain looking at the debauchery. I am here representing the buyers. The buyers, you. Who is it? Who is Arrowhead Holdings? A second person emerged from the car. It was Elara. She was wearing a cream-colored Loro Piana cashmere coat and simple trousers. Her hair was pulled back. She looked calm, rested, and utterly in control. She looked at the house, at the graffiti, at the hung-over state of her ex-husband, and her expression didn't flicker. Elara, Richard whispered. His blood ran cold. The aspirin, the champagne, the victory, it all curdled in his stomach. Richard, she said, her voice even. You've been busy. You bought my house, he stammered, a laugh bordering on a sob escaping his lips. You bought this too. What? To get back at me. You spent $85 million to spite me. He was grasping, trying to find a narrative where he was still the main character. Don't be ridiculous, Richard, Elara said, as if speaking to a child. I didn't buy your house. I don't have $85 million in liquid cash. That's your game. Then who? Arrowhead Holdings, she said, is a subsidiary of the Vance Family Foundation. The foundation did buy your house, or rather, as I told my uncle. They bought the land, the view. Richard's mind was failing to compute. The foundation. A charity. What does a charity want with a mansion? Oh, they don't, Elara said. She walked past him towards the front door, which was hanging slightly off one hinge. They have no use for the house at all. I don't understand, Richard said, following her, panic rising in his throat. The foundation, Elara explained, stopping in the atrium and looking up at the grotesque spray-painted graffiti, is in the process of building the new Vance Wing for the New York Museum of Modern Art, a project that unfortunately was delayed by an investor who defaulted on his pledge. She looked at him. He was that investor. He'd pledged $50 million to the museum to get his name on a wall and had quietly defaulted 3 months ago. The foundation, she continued, has decided to liquidate some of its less essential real estate holdings to fund the wing themselves. For instance, this incredibly valuable plot of land in Southampton. Liquidate, you just bought it. Yes, an acquisition and a liquidation, Elara said. We've already resold it. Richard's world tilted. Resold it. To who, for how much? We sold it to the developer who owns the adjacent 3 properties. He's been trying to acquire this land for a decade to build his new golf course. He paid $95 million. The $10 million profit will be a lovely donation to the foundation. $95 million? Richard's knees felt weak. He'd been so desperate he'd sold to the first offer, not even realizing he'd left $10 million on the table. But the house. Oh, the developer. He hates the house too, Elara said. He's tearing it down. The demolition crew arrives at noon. Richard physically recoiled. Tearing it down? My house. My masterpiece. It's not a masterpiece, Richard. It's a badly built nightclub with a plumbing problem. The demolition, she added, checking her watch, is in 1 hour. This was the final blow. It wasn't just a sale. It wasn't revenge. It was erasure. He wasn't even a footnote. He was a mistake that was being bulldozed. But why? He whispered, sinking onto a ruined velvet ottoman. Why? You, Elara. Why do this to me? Elara turned to him, and the ice was back. Do this to you, Richard. You seem to be under the impression that this was about you. It wasn't. You defaulted on the Al-Jamil loan. My uncle's bank held the note. You defaulted on your pledge to the museum. My family chairs the museum. You weren't a rival, Richard. You were a mess. We were simply tidying up. This was just business. Business, he repeated numbly. Yes, you taught me that. You said your money was real and my family was dusty. You just forgot something. Dust settles, but it never goes away. The Vance dynasty was here 100 years before you, and it will be here 100 years after you're gone. Mr. Harrison stepped forward. Mr. Sterling, the funds have been wired to your account, minus the $50 million pledge you defaulted on to the museum, for which the foundation graciously covered your debt, and of course the closing costs and the $50,000 fee for cleaning this. Richard looked at his phone. A wire transfer alert. The $85 million had become $34.9 million. Enough to stop the immediate bleeding on the Dubai project, but not nearly enough to save it. It was a mortal wound. You bitch! He spat the word, lacking any force. Elara didn't even flinch. Goodbye, Richard. I hope you find the fire you were looking for. She turned and walked out the door, stepping gracefully over a shattered baccarat vase. Richard Sterling sat alone in the ruins of his $84 million monument, the sound of the ocean drowned out by the approaching rumble of bulldozers. He didn't move. He just stared at the wall where Isabella's palace was already starting to peel. He collapsed, not a physical faint, but a complete, hollow-eyed spiritual surrender. He just gave up. The demolition of the Sterling Point was efficient and brutal. By 4 p.m. it was rubble. By the end of the week, the land was flat as if the house had never existed. The Post ran a single snarky headline, Sterling's house flops, Vance family, tears down tacky mansion. The public humiliation was total. Richard Sterling was radioactive. The $35 million he'd cleared was vaporized in 2 weeks, eaten by penalty fees from Dubai and the avalanche of creditors who, seeing the news, demanded their money now. He tried to call Isabella. She was in Milan, and her phone went straight to voicemail. He texted her, "I'm in trouble, baby. I need you." She texted back 5 hours later, "Richard, I'm sorry. I can't be with a man who isn't successful. It's bad for my brand. My publicist will release a statement. I wish you the best." He was in his rented Tribeca penthouse. The lease was up in 30 days when he saw her Instagram post. She was on a yacht in Lake Como with the Al Jamil Sheikh. "New Horizons," the caption read. Richard threw his phone against the wall. It shattered. A week later, Sterling Properties filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The Dubai Tower was seized by his partners. His Manhattan office, his fleet of cars, his Tom Ford suits, all were seized by the bank. He was, for the first time since he was 20 years old, completely and totally broke. He was worse than broke. He was in debt, and his name was toxic. Elara Vance read the news on Bloomberg while sitting in her office at the Chelsea Gallery. She was reviewing the catalogue for her next show, New Perspectives in Postmodern Sculpture. Her assistant knocked. "Miss Vance, a Mr. Richard Sterling is here to see you." Elara looked up, surprised. "Here? Yes, he doesn't have an appointment. He looks unwell." Elara considered it for a moment. "Fine, send him in, and bring 2 coffees." Richard entered. He was a different man. His suit was wrinkled, his face was gaunt, and the arrogant fire in his eyes was gone. He was just a tired, defeated man. "Elara," he said, his voice hoarse. "Richard, this is a surprise," she said, gesturing to a chair. He sat. I don't know why I'm here," he said, staring at his hands. "I guess I wanted to ask what Richard for money for. What pity. I want to know. Was it all a lie?" he whispered. "Our 10 years. Did you ever love me? Or was I just amusing?" Elara looked at him, and the ice in her demeanor softened just slightly into a cold, clear water. "I did love you, Richard. Once. A long time ago. I loved your drive, your energy. I loved that you weren't like the boys I grew up with. You built things. I admired that. Then why? Because you stopped loving me," she said, her voice firm. "You stopped seeing me. You saw Vance. You saw a trophy. And when that wasn't shiny enough, you traded it in for a different one. You didn't just leave me, Richard. You dismissed me. You dismissed my family, my life, my worth. You stood in the house my family's name helped you build, and you told me I was nothing without you." She leaned forward. All of this, she gestured to the bankruptcy news on her screen. "This wasn't my uncle. This wasn't my family. This was you. My family just let it happen. They removed the safety net you never even knew you had. You built your empire on a foundation of Vance credit, Vance connections, and Vance tolerance. When you betrayed me, you didn't just lose a wife. You lost your entire infrastructure." Richard just stared, the full, devastating truth finally landing. He hadn't been a self-made man. He had been a sponsored one. What do I do now?" he asked, a broken man. "I don't know, Richard," Elara said. She pushed one of the coffees toward him. "You're a builder. You said so yourself. So, build. Start over. This time, build it on rock, not sand. He looked at the coffee. He looked at her. She was a queen in her own right, secure, powerful, and fair. He stood up, not touching the drink. "Goodbye, Elara," he said. "Goodbye, Richard." He walked out of the gallery, past the priceless art, and onto the street. He was just a man in a rumpled suit. He had no car, no home, no one. He started walking with no destination in mind. 1 year later, the Southampton landscape had changed. Where the Sterling Point had once stood, there was now a sprawling, beautiful one-story public art pavilion. It was called the Vance Pavilion for the Arts. It was a masterpiece of glass fieldstone and light designed by a Pritzker prize-winning architect. It housed a rotating collection of sculptures and offered free art classes to the community. Its gardens, which ran down to the ocean, were open to the public. Elara Vance was at the opening ceremony. She wasn't in the spotlight. She was in the crowd, watching a group of local children learning to paint the ocean. Her uncle Julian stood beside her. "It's beautiful, Elara," he said. "A much better use of the view." "It is," she agreed. "It feels right." The New York Times ran a glowing piece on it. A monument to generosity. How Elara Vance turned a symbol of 21st century excess into a beacon of public culture. She had taken Richard's monument to ego and transformed it into a legacy of culture. In Milan, Isabella Monet was photographed arguing with the Al Jamil Sheikh, who had just traded her in for an even younger 19-year-old influencer from Russia. Her Vogue covers had dried up. She was last seen hosting a Red Bull promotion on a beach in Ibiza. Her fire had burned out. And Richard Sterling. He was in Austin, Texas. He was working as a junior project manager for a small commercial construction firm. He lived in a rented one-bedroom apartment. He was driving a Ford Focus. He was in fact building. He was starting over. He kept a small laminated clipping in his wallet. It wasn't of his old Forbes covers. It was the article about Elara's new pavilion. He was at a building site in a hard hat, yelling at a contractor about rebar, when his phone rang. It was an unknown New York number. He answered. "Sterling? Richard, it's Elara." He froze. "Elara? Wow. Hello." "Hello. I heard you were in Austin, that you were building again." "Yeah, small stuff, office parks, but it's honest work," he said. "I know," she said. "My foundation. We're funding a new low-income housing project in East Austin. We need a senior manager, someone who knows how to build but who also knows what it's like to lose it all. Someone who'll build it right." Richard was silent. He couldn't speak. "It's a job, Richard," she said, her voice not cold, not warm, but clear. "If you want it, it's a chance to build something that lasts." He looked at the dusty blueprint in his hand, then at the sky. He had lost his mansion. He had lost his wife. He had lost his Montpellier, but in the ruins he'd found a single, tiny, buried seed. "Yes," he said, his voice thick. "Elara. Yes, I'd like that." She had bought his mansion. She had torn it down. And in doing so, she had given him the one thing his millions could never buy a chance at redemption. Thank you for watching this story. We see so often in life that the loudest person in the room is often the weakest. Richard Sterling built his entire life on the idea of power, but Elara Vance wielded the reality of it. She didn't have to scream. She just had to wait. She knew that true power, true legacy isn't about what you own. It's about what you can build, what you can give, and what you're willing to protect. What did you think of Ilara's ultimate move? Was it cold-blooded revenge, or was it simply the consequences of Richard's own actions? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want more tales of drama justice and the powerful lessons of life, please make sure to like this video. Share it with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to our channel for new stories every week. He paraded his mistress in front of the city's elite, forcing his wife to watch. He stood on stage at the most exclusive gala of the year, holding an award, and called his wife a simple woman, a hobbyist he kept around to remind him of his humble beginnings. The room fell silent, the humiliation hanging thick in the air. But he made one mistake. He didn't just humiliate his wife. He did it in a room full of people, including her mother. And he's about to find out that his wife's simple mother is the one who owns the room the award, and now his entire future. The air in the penthouse was suffocating thick with the scent of Gregory's expensive Tom Ford cologne and Lena's silent anxiety. Outside, the lights of Central Park West glittered like a carpet of diamonds, but inside Lena felt trapped in a perfectly curated high-gloss prison. Is that really what you're wearing?" Gregory's voice sliced through the silence. He didn't look at her, not directly. He was adjusting the onyx cufflinks on his bespoke shirt, his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window, his only audience. Lena looked down at her dress. It was a deep, almost black sapphire velvet, simple, long-sleeved with a modest boat neck. It was an archival Bottega Veneta piece, something she had owned for years, long before Gregory had even heard of the brand. It was quiet, elegant, and screamed old money in a way Gregory's flashy, logo-driven wardrobe never could. Yes, Lena said, her voice small. "I've always loved this dress." "You've always loved it," Gregory mimicked, finally turning. His eyes, cold and assessing, raked over her. Lena was a stunning woman. Her dark skin seemed to glow against the deep blue velvet, and her hair was pulled back in an elegant, intricate knot. But Gregory didn't see beauty. He saw a lack of effort. "Lena, this is the Metropolitan Foundation Gala. This isn't one of your little bakery fundraisers. This is my night. I'm receiving the Pinnacle Award. People will be watching. My people. And I am not your people." She asked the words barely a whisper. Gregory sighed, a theatrical sound of immense suffering. "Don't be dramatic. You know what I mean. I need you to look the part. That thing, it's drab. It's depressing. Bianca is having her dress flown in from Paris. It's Atelier Versace. That is what the part looks like." Bianca. The name hung in the air, a toxic cloud. Bianca, his new executive assistant, a woman whose resume was as thin as the fabric of her dresses. "Bianca is your assistant, Gregory. I am your wife," Lena said, her hands clenching at her sides. "And as my wife, your job is to reflect me, to reflect my success." He stormed over to her, grabbing her arm. His grip was just a little too tight. "I built this. I built Lawson Innovations from the ground up. I dragged us into this world, and you seem determined to cling to your simplicity. My bakery is a multi-million-dollar business, Gregory. Lena said the same argument they'd had 100 times. It's a hobby, he spat. It's a cute little place where you play with flour. I am dealing in global logistics in AI, in a future you can't even comprehend. Tonight, the board of the Metropolitan Foundation will be there. The anonymous benefactor J.D. is rumored to be making their first public appearance. This is the big league, Lena, and you look like you're dressed for a funeral. Maybe I am, she said, pulling her arm free. His eyes narrowed. What did you say? Nothing. I'll put on the diamond necklace you bought. It was a garish, heavy piece of jewelry, new money screaming for attention. She hated it. Good. And try to look happy. Try to look impressed. When I'm on that stage, I want you to look at me like you understand what I've accomplished. I know exactly what you've accomplished, Gregory. He took that as a compliment, giving her a satisfied, predatory smile. Exactly. Now don't be late. The car is downstairs, and for God's sake, put on some lipstick. You look washed out. He swept out of the room, leaving her alone with her reflection. The woman staring back at her looked tired, her eyes hollow. She had met Gregory when he had nothing but a laptop and a desperate, charming energy. She had been the one to invest her own savings, a small trust fund from her grandfather, to get his company off the ground. She had coached him, edited his proposals, and believed in him. And he had, in turn, erased her. She picked up her phone. A single text message was waiting. Landing at Teterboro now. I'll see you at the event. Remember who you are, my love. Lena's fingers trembled. Her mother. Josephine. The one person Gregory had always refused to meet, dismissing her as a drifting hippie who lived off the grid in Wyoming. He had no idea. Lena had kept it that way. She had wanted just once to be loved for herself, not for her name. Not for the Devereaux billions. She looked at the garish necklace Gregory wanted her to wear. Then she looked back at the simple velvet dress. With a sudden cold resolve, she left the necklace in its box. She would not be his prop. Tonight, she would be herself. The Plaza Hotel was a fortress of light and power. The entrance to the grand ballroom was flanked by paparazzi, their cameras flashing like epileptic stars, capturing the arrival of New York's old guard and new titans. Gregory, stepping out of the black Mercedes Maybach, was in his element. He preened, adjusting his Tom Ford bow tie, offering the cameras his practiced $1,000,000 smile. He turned his hand outstretched, expecting Lena to take it. When she emerged, his smile faltered, hissing through his teeth. You didn't wear the necklace. It didn't go with the dress, Lena said calmly, her voice surprisingly steady. The cold night air had cleared her head. The dress doesn't go with the event, he snapped, keeping the smile plastered on his face for the cameras. He grabbed her hand and pulled her close, his fingers digging into her side. Smile, Lena. You look like you're attending an execution. I am, she thought. The execution of my marriage. They walked the crimson carpet. The murmurs started almost immediately. Gregory was a known quantity, the brash, handsome founder of Lawson Innovations, the new darling of the tech sector. But Lena was an enigma. She was rarely seen at these events. Who is that? A woman with a face pulled tight by surgery whispered to her companion loud enough for Lena to hear. That's the wife, Lena Lawson. She runs a cupcake shop, I think. A cupcake shop, good Lord. He's receiving the Pinnacle Award and he brings a baker. And that dress, it's so plain. Did she get lost on her way to a staff meeting? Gregory heard it all. He squeezed her side harder, a silent, painful command to stand taller, to look less common. But Lena couldn't. She felt the weight of hundreds of eyes, all judging, all dismissing. She saw the other women draped in couture, dripping with diamonds that were unlike hers, worn with an air of absolute entitlement. And then the sea of black and white parted. Bianca had arrived. She was a supernova of manufactured beauty. Her dress was, as Gregory had promised, Atelier Versace, a cascade of gold chains and scarlet silk that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. Her hair was platinum blonde, her smile sweet and predatory. She wasn't just dressed to kill. She was dressed for a hostile takeover. The cameras loved her. "Bianca, Bianca, who are you wearing?" "Versace, darling," she purred, blowing a kiss. Gregory's mask slipped. A look of genuine, possessive hunger crossed his features. He dropped Lena's hand as if it were burning hot. "Gregory, darling," Bianca shrieked, gliding over. She completely ignored Lena, wrapping her arms around Gregory's neck and kissing him full on the mouth, right there on the red carpet. The cameras exploded. Flash. 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 Lena stood frozen 2 feet away. She was invisible. The humiliation was so profound, so public, it was almost surreal. It wasn't just an affair. It was a public declaration. He was replacing her. "Bianca, you made it," Gregory said, his voice husky. He didn't push her away. He held her waist, his hand splayed possessively on the bare skin of her back. "I wouldn't miss your big night for the world, baby," she whispered, tracing the lapel of his jacket. "We have so much to celebrate." She finally turned her eyes to Lena. She looked her up and down, a perfect painted brow arching in disdain. "Oh, hello, Lena. I almost didn't see you there. That dress is very modest." "Bianca," Lena said, her voice tight. "Gregory," a gala organizer said, rushing over his face a mask of frantic politeness. "Mr. Lawson, your table is ready, right at the front." "Of course," Gregory said. He put one arm around Bianca's waist. He looked at Lena, his eyes flat. "Well, are you coming?" He didn't offer his arm. He didn't wait for her. He simply turned and walked into the ballroom, his mistress on his arm, leaving his wife to follow behind them like a servant. Lena stood for a moment, the flashing lights blinding her, the sound of the crowd roaring in her ears. She had 2 choices. She could turn around, call a cab, and go home. Or she could see this through to its bitter, inevitable end. She thought of her mother's text. "Remember who you are." Straightening her spine, her head held high. Lena Lawson walked into the ballroom. She was no longer just following him. She was going to witness his downfall. The grand ballroom was a masterpiece of opulent vulgarity. Each table centerpiece was a towering explosion of orchids and feathers dripping with crystals. The clinking of silverware on porcelain and the low hum of self-important conversation filled the air. Lena was seated at the head table, table 1, but her position was a mockery. Gregory had placed himself at the head. To his right, in the seat of honor that should have been Lena's, sat Bianca. Lena was placed to his left, but shoved down 1 seat next to a geriatric banking executive who had already fallen asleep in his soup. The message was clear. Bianca was the new priority. Lena was an afterthought. "Isn't this just breathtaking?" Bianca breathed, sipping her champagne. She was talking to Gregory, but her voice was pitched for the whole table to hear. "It's just power. You fit right in, Gregory." "We fit right in." Gregory corrected his hand, rubbing small circles on her back. Lena stared at her plate. She didn't eat. She drank water, the cold liquid a small anchor in the churning sea of her nausea. She watched them. They whispered, they laughed, they fed each other small bites of appetizers. It was a performance, a grotesque, intimate play designed for one audience member, her. After what felt like an eternity of filet mignon and polite applause for minor donors, the host, a famous news anchor, took the stage. "And now the moment we've all been waiting for," the anchor boomed. "The Metropolitan Foundation's Pinnacle Award for Innovation and Leadership. This award goes to a man who has truly redefined his industry. From a small startup to a global powerhouse, Lawson Innovations is changing the world. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage, Mr. Gregory Lawson." The room erupted in applause. Gregory stood buttoning his jacket. He kissed Bianca a long, lingering press of lips that made the table fall silent. Then, as an afterthought, he glanced at Lena and gave her a sharp, warning look. "Behave." He bounded onto the stage, shaking the host's hand, accepting the heavy crystal award. He soaked in the applause, his arms raised. "Thank you, thank you." He began, his voice smooth and practiced. "What an incredible honor. To be recognized by the Metropolitan Foundation. It's just... wow." He started with the usual platitudes. He thanked the board. He thanked his team. He spoke about synergy and disruption and scalable futures. Lena could have recited the speech by heart. She'd written the first draft of it. Then his tone shifted. He looked down at his table. "You know, people see me up here," he said, "and they see the success. They see the penthouse, the private jet, the name on the building. But they don't see the struggle. They don't see the beginning." He smiled a wide, disingenuous grin. "But I have a living, breathing reminder of that beginning. Every single day." He pointed, not at Bianca. He pointed directly at Lena. The spotlight operator, confused, shifted the beam. It landed on Lena, pinning her to her chair. She was suddenly illuminated, every eye in the room on her. "My wife, Lena," Gregory said. The room gave a polite, confused smattering of applause. "When I met Lena, I had nothing. And she had a little less than that." A few nervous titters. Gregory fed on it. "She's a simple woman," he continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "A woman of simple tastes. While I'm out here building an empire, she's at home. Baking. Yes, baking. Cookies, cupcakes, little pies. It's adorable." The humiliation was a physical thing. Lena felt it land on her, a heavy, suffocating blanket. She could feel the pitying stares, the quiet, vicious judgment. "And I love her for it," Gregory said, the lie tasting like acid in Lena's ears. "I love that she keeps me grounded. She reminds me that no matter how high I fly, there's always someone back on Earth worrying about whether the brownies are too moist." The room was dead silent. The titters had died. This wasn't a charming anecdote. It was a public execution. Gregory, sensing he was losing them, tried to recover. "She's my rock. My simple, unshakable rock. While I'm here with the brilliant minds, the artists, the real movers and shakers," he gestured to Bianca, who preened. "I know she's at home. Or, well, here in this case." He laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "She's probably wondering what all these forks are for." That was it. That was the final cut. The mask of polite society had been ripped away, revealing the monster beneath. Lena didn't cry. She didn't look down. She kept her eyes locked on her husband, her gaze so cold, so steady, it was a wonder he didn't freeze solid. "So thank you." Gregory said, finally sensing he had gone too far. He raised his award. Thank you to the Foundation, and thank you to my wife, for always reminding me just how far I've come. He walked off the stage to a stunned, lukewarm applause. He returned to the table, his face flushed with adrenaline and champagne. He sat down, ignoring Lena, and immediately grabbed Bianca's hand. How was I? You were magnificent, baby, Bianca whispered, kissing his knuckles. You told the truth. Yes, Gregory said, glancing at Lena, his eyes filled with triumph and malice. I did. Lena picked up her water glass. Her hand was perfectly steady. She took a slow, deliberate sip, the ice clinking softly against the glass. The sound was as loud as a gunshot in the silence of their table. She set the glass down, and she waited, because she knew what was coming next. The humiliation settled over Lena, not as a hot flush of shame, but as a clarifying Arctic cold. The noise of the gala, the music, the chatter, all of it faded into a distant roar. Her world had shrunk to the few feet of damask tablecloth between her and the man she had once loved. Gregory was basking in the toxic glow of his own cruelty. He and Bianca were now posing for selfies, the crystal award held between them. He was openly, flagrantly erasing Lena from his life, right in front of her. A waiter appeared, his face a mask of professional neutrality, though his eyes darted to Lena with a flicker of pity. Ma'am, would you care for some coffee? Lena shook her head, unable to trust her voice. She felt rather than saw the stares of the other guests. They weren't looking at Gregory the victor. They were looking at her, the victim. They were staring with that morbid curiosity reserved for car crashes and public failures. She wanted to run. She wanted to throw her glass of water in Gregory's smug face, flip the table and scream. But she was not a simple woman. She was a Devereaux. And Devereaux women did not make scenes. They made ends. Her phone buzzed on her lap. She looked down. Another text from her mother. He's even worse than I imagined. Are you ready? Lena typed a single word back. Yes. She put the phone away and looked up, scanning the vast, opulent room. And that's when she saw her. In a discreet, shadowed alcove near the back of the ballroom, far from the power tables at the front, sat a woman. She was not young. She was not flashy. She was dressed in a severe, exquisitely tailored navy blue acris suit. Her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a chignon that was as elegant as it was practical. Her only jewelry was a simple pearl necklace and a man's-style Patek Philippe watch. She was watching. She wasn't watching the stage or the crowd. Her gaze was fixed like a sniper's scope on table 1, on Gregory, on Bianca, and on Lena. This was her mother, Josephine Devereaux. To the rest of the room, she was a nobody. An older, well-dressed guest, perhaps a donor's +1. But Lena knew the truth. That suit, while appearing simple, was custom-made and cost more than Gregory's car. That simple watch was a grand complications model worth a small fortune. And the woman wearing them was at that moment the single most powerful person in the room. Josephine had built an empire from her father's small Wyoming land grant, turning it into Devereaux Holdings, a silent, sprawling behemoth of energy logistics and high-end hospitality. She was notoriously private, her name never appearing on any rich list, because she'd structured her companies to be utterly impenetrable. She was the definition of stealth wealth, and she was, as Gregory had so mockingly guessed, the mysterious keynote speaker. The anonymous J.D., As Lena watched, Josephine caught her eye. She gave no sign of recognition, no smile of comfort. Instead, she gave Lena a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was a nod of confirmation. The plan is in motion. Stay strong. A new kind of energy surged through Lena. The ice in her veins turned to steel. The shame was burned away by a cold, righteous fury. Gregory had called her simple. He had called her a rock. He was about to find out what happens when you try to build your flimsy, fraudulent house on a rock you don't own. The rock doesn't just sit there. The rock moves, and it crushes everything in its path. The host returned to the stage, his smile looking a little forced. "Thank you, Gregory Lawson, for that very speech," he said, stumbling slightly. "And now we have a very special treat. For the first time, the founder and chief benefactor of the Metropolitan Foundation has agreed to address us. We know her only by her initials, J.D. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Ms. Josephine Devereux." At table 1, Gregory's head snapped up. Devereux. He whispered, his brow furrowing. "Where have I heard that name before?" Bianca, reapplying her lipstick, shrugged. "Sounds old and boring." Lena just smiled. She turned in her chair, her entire body angled toward the stage, and watched as her mother, the drifting hippie, stood up from her table in the back and began to walk toward the stage. The simple woman was about to meet the source code. The walk from the back of the ballroom to the stage was not long, but Josephine Devereux commanded every inch of it. The room, which had been buzzing about Gregory's speech, fell into a profound, curious silence. She moved with an unhurried, undeniable authority. She was not a socialite. She was not a celebrity. She was, it was clear to everyone, power. At table 1, Gregory watched, his eyes narrowed. "Devereux. Devereux. Lena, isn't that your mother's maiden name?" Lena said nothing. She just smiled, a small, private smile that for the first time all night was genuine. "Don't be ridiculous," Gregory muttered, more to himself than to her. "Her mother is some broke artist in Wyoming. This is just a coincidence." Josephine reached the stage. She did not wait for the host to hand her the microphone. She took it from the stand herself. She stood in the center of the stage, bathed in the same spotlight that had minutes earlier been used to humiliate her daughter. She didn't smile. She simply surveyed the room, her gaze sweeping over the tables of billionaires, senators, and socialites. Her eyes lingered for just a second on table 1. "Good evening," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it was deep and resonant, and it carried to every corner of the room without effort. "My name is Josephine Devereux. For 20 years I have funded this foundation anonymously. I did so not out of modesty, but for clarity. I wanted the work to speak for itself, not the name attached to it. I wanted to see who would be drawn to the mission and who would be drawn to the money." Her eyes found Gregory's. He shifted in his seat, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "The Metropolitan Foundation," Josephine continued, "is built on one principle. Integrity. We honor those who build, not those who take. We honor those who create value, not those who simply and loudly claim it." A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. This was not the light, self-congratulatory speech they were used to. "Tonight," Josephine said, "we honored Mr. Gregory Lawson with the Pinnacle Award for Innovation, an award, I might add, that comes with a $50 million grant for his company, Lawson Innovations." Gregory's eyes widened. He hadn't known about the grant. Bianca gasped, her hand flying to her chest. 50 million? A substantial amount, Josephine agreed, as if reading her mind. A sum we do not bestow lightly. It is meant to reward not just financial success, but moral character. The character of a leader. The character of a man. She began to pace the stage slowly, her presence dominating the room. I am, as Mr. Lawson might say, a simple woman. I was born in Wyoming. My father was a rancher. He left me land, and I built on it. I built quietly. I built slowly. I built things that last. I learned on that land that you can't fake a foundation. You can't build a skyscraper on soft ground. You can't build a legacy on lies. It will inevitably collapse. Gregory was now staring at her, his face pale, a dawning, sickening horror in his eyes. He was connecting the dots. Wyoming. Simple. Devereaux. He knows. Lena whispered the words, a quiet, satisfying hiss. But the most important thing I ever built, Josephine said, her voice softening for the first time, was not a company. It was my daughter. She turned and looked directly at Lena. This time her gaze was filled with a fierce, protective love. My daughter. I taught her to be strong. I taught her to be kind. I taught her to see the value in hard work, whether it was in a boardroom or, yes, in a bakery. The entire room turned as one to look at Lena. She was no longer the humiliated wife. She was the focal point of a new, terrifying narrative. I also taught her. Josephine's voice hardened again, that money should be a tool, not a shackle. So she decided when she fell in love to hide her name, to hide her inheritance. She wanted to be loved for who she was, not for what or for what she had. She wanted a partner, a genuine partner built on a real foundation. Josephine's eyes swung back to Gregory. They were not angry. They were a colder, more terrifying emotion. Disgusted. And she ended up with, you. The silence in the room was absolute. It was so quiet, Lena could hear the faint hiss of the audio feedback from the microphone. Gregory looked like he had been struck by lightning. His mouth was open, his skin a waxy greenish white. He was staring at Lena, his eyes wide with a confusion so profound, it was almost comical. Lena, he whispered. Bianca, on the other hand, was doing quick, panicked math. Her eyes darted from Josephine to Lena and back to Gregory. She was realizing in real time that she had hitched her wagon to a dead horse. On stage, Josephine was just getting started. Mr. Lawson, she said, her voice like velvet-covered steel. You stood on this stage and you mocked your wife. You called her simple. You mocked her little hobby. She gave a dry, humorless laugh. Let me educate you on simple. You see that simple dress my daughter is wearing? It's an archival, one-of-a-kind Bottega Veneta from my personal collection. Its insured value is $300,000. But you wouldn't know that. It doesn't have a big, flashy logo. A wave of gasps. The woman who had mocked Lena's dress looked like she was about to faint. And her little hobby, Josephine continued. Her bakery, Lena's Kitchen. Let me tell you about that hobby. 3 years ago, Devereaux Holdings, my company, acquired a 49% stake in her business. We began a quiet rollout. As of last quarter, Lena's Kitchen is the sole exclusive patisserie provider for all 180 Devereaux Grand Hotels worldwide. Her little hobby cleared $75 million in profit last year. The sound in the room was a collective strangled gasp. Gregory made a small choking sound. "But wait, I'm not finished," Josephine said, holding up a hand. "Mr. Lawson, you spoke of your company. Lawson Innovations, how you built it from nothing. You seem to have forgotten the $1 million seed investment that got you started." Gregory looked at Lena, his face a mask of betrayal. That was your grandfather's trust." "No," Lena said, speaking for the first time, her voice clear and strong. "It was my trust, from my mother's side. It was Devereaux money, Gregory. You built your entire company on the simple foundation you just spat on." Josephine smiled, "and a very good investment it was. But you see, my company Devereaux Holdings doesn't just invest. We acquire. When your company was struggling 3 years ago during that unfortunate over-leverage situation, you were desperate for a cash infusion, a silent partner." She paused, letting the implication land. Gregory's face was sheet white. No, the silent partner was JH Group, a Swiss holding company, Josephine finished for him. "That is a wholly owned subsidiary of Devereaux Holdings. My company, Mr. Lawson, owns 60% of your company. I am your boss. I am your partner. And as of tonight, I am your worst nightmare." The room was in chaos. People were standing, whispering, pointing. This wasn't just a speech. It was a corporate execution. "You see, Mr. Lawson, I have a morality clause in all my contracts," Josephine boomed. "A clause that states I will not do business with anyone who demonstrates a fundamental lack of character integrity or basic human decency. And what you did on this stage tonight, what you have been doing to my daughter for the past 5 years, is a catastrophic breach of that contract." She looked over at the host, who was standing slack-jawed in the wings. "Therefore, effective immediately, the Metropolitan Foundation officially rescinds the Pinnacle Award from Mr. Gregory Lawson." A collective shriek went up. "And," Josephine added, her voice dropping, "effective at 9 a.m. tomorrow, Devereaux Holdings will be calling in its entire debt line, dumping its 60% stake, and filing a motion with the board to remove you as CEO pending a full forensic audit of your expenses." She looked pointedly at Bianca. "Including but not limited to company-funded apartments, vacations, and of course Atelier Versace gowns." Bianca stood up so fast her chair screeched backward. "He told me it was a corporate bonus," she shrieked at Gregory. You liar! You loser!" She picked up her champagne flute and, in a perfect dramatic arc, threw the contents directly in Gregory's face. She then grabbed her gold clutch and stormed out of the ballroom, shoving a waiter out of her way. Gregory just sat there, dripping with champagne, and ruin his life, utterly, completely, and publicly detonated. Gregory sat paralyzed, a grotesque statue of ruin. The champagne dripped from his chin onto his lapel, mingling with the sweat of pure, unadulterated terror. The cameras which had adored him an hour ago were now vultures, their flashes documenting every twitch of his crumbling facade. He was in this moment the most photographed failure in New York. He looked at Lena. His eyes, stripped of their arrogant fire, were now hollow, begging. He didn't see a wife. He saw a lifeboat. He half stumbled, half crawled from his chair, reaching for her hand, his voice a pathetic gurgling rasp. "Lena, baby, please," he stammered, his hand shaking violently. You have to tell her. It was a joke. Just a stupid, terrible joke. Tell her to stop this. It's me. It's us." Lena looked down at the hand reaching for hers. The hand that had held Bianca's, the hand that had gripped her arm in their penthouse. She felt nothing. No anger, no hatred, just a vast Arctic calm. The man she had loved was a memory. This thing was just a consequence. I didn't know," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "You never told me. You let me look like a fool." Her gaze, cold and clinical, rose to meet his. "A fool, no, Gregory. You did that all on your own. Stop this," he begged. "Tell her to call it off. The grant, the company. It's our life. Tell her to." Lena looked at him, truly. Looked at him and saw him for the small, frightened grifter he had always been. "Stop what, Gregory?" she asked, her voice calm and clear, cutting through his panicked sobs. "Stop her from telling the truth. You love the truth. You just said so on stage. You were magnificent, remember?" She pulled her hand back out of his desperate, grasping range, and then with the slow, deliberate grace of a queen, Lena stood up. The entire ballroom watched. She was no longer the humiliated wife, an object of pity. She was the epicenter. She bent slightly, picking up her simple, elegant velvet clutch from the table. She smoothed the front of her simple dress, an action so mundane, so unhurried, that it felt like the most profound gesture of power in the room. Gregory scrambled to his feet, his desperation turning, as it always did, to his last remaining weapon rage. His face contorted. "Lena," he bellowed, his voice cracking. "Don't you walk away from me. Where do you think you're going?" "I am still your husband." His words echoed in the sudden dead silence. It was his final, pathetic attempt to claim ownership, to assert a control that had evaporated. Lena paused. She did not turn her full body, only her head looking at him over her shoulder. Her expression was not one of anger, but of finality, like a judge pronouncing a sentence that had been written long ago. "No, Gregory," she said, her voice carrying in the hush. "You're not my husband. You're just the man I've been supporting. And my dividends. They've just been reallocated." The financial metaphor was a perfectly placed stiletto, the only language he truly understood. She saw the comprehension, the final devastating understanding hit his eyes. She turned away from him and began to walk. It was not a retreat. It was a procession. She did not walk to the exit. She walked with the same measured, powerful grace her mother had shown toward the stage. The sea of billionaires and socialites parted for her. The whispers that followed her were no longer of pity, but of awe. She was no longer the baker. She was no longer the simple wife. She was Lena Devereaux. She reached the stage and ascended the steps not as a victim, but as the victor. She stood beside her mother, two queens, surveying their kingdom. Josephine's eyes were alight with a fierce, profound pride. She didn't hug her daughter. It wasn't the time. Instead, she handed Lena the microphone. The gesture was a coronation. Lena took it. Her hand was perfectly steady. She turned, facing the room, facing the man who had tried to destroy her. She looked out at the sea of shocked, fascinated faces. "I apologize," she said, her voice ringing with the same innate authority as her mother's. The room held its breath. "I apologize that you all had to witness my soon-to-be ex-husband's final performance." She paused, letting the words land. He was right about one thing tonight. He has come a very, very long way from the man I married. So far, in fact, that I no longer recognize him at all. She then locked her gaze on Gregory, who was now being flanked by two large, unimpressed security guards. They hadn't touched him yet, but their presence was a cage. "Tonight," Lena continued, her voice a clarion call of absolute clarity. "He tried to make me small. He called me simple. He mocked my work. He defined me as a hobbyist. He kept around to remind him of his humble beginnings." She panned her gaze across the room, meeting the eyes of the women who had pitied her. "Let me be clear. A woman's worth is never defined by her husband's success. It is not defined by his approval, and it is certainly not defined by his public ridicule." Her eyes snapped back to Gregory. "Gregory," she said, and her voice, amplified, was the only sound in the world. "You called me your rock. You were right. But you fundamentally misunderstood what that means. A rock is not something you stand on to make yourself look taller. A rock is not a prop for your fragile ego." She took a step forward, commanding the very spotlight that had been used to shame her. "A rock is a foundation, and when you try to build a house of lies on a foundation of integrity, the foundation wins. It doesn't move. You just break yourself against it. Or in your case, a rock is what sinks you to the bottom when you've been tied to it for far too long." A collective audible gasp went through the room. It was an execution. Lena held his gaze for 1 second longer, then dismissed him. She turned to her mother. "Mom, I think we're done here." "I agree," Josephine said, taking the microphone back. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your donations. Please enjoy your dessert." Together, mother and daughter, the two most powerful women in the room, turned their backs on the wreckage and walked off the stage. As they reached the grand lobby, the chaos erupted behind them. Gregory's voice, no longer commanding, was a pathetic, hysterical shriek. "You can't do this. Do you know who I am? I am Gregory Lawson." "Yeah," a new bored voice, a security guard's, replied. "You're the guy we're throwing out. Move it." Lena didn't look back. She didn't need to. The noise of the ballroom, the pop, pop, pop of flashbulbs, Gregory's pathetic shouts, it all faded muffled by the heavy doors closing behind them. They were alone in the vast, quiet marble lobby. Lena's phone, deep in her clutch, gave a single, muffled buzz. She paused, pulling it out. It was a news alert from the Wall Street Journal. "Lawson Innovations, Law I, in free fall, down 80% in after-hours trading following CEO's gala scandal and Devereaux Holdings' public divestment." She read it. She felt no spike of triumph, no thrill of revenge. She felt a correction, a balancing of the scales, a messy, painful equation that had finally been solved. She silenced the phone, slipped it back into her bag, and took her mother's arm. She inhaled a deep, full breath that filled her lungs for the first time in a decade. And for the first time in a very, very long time, Lena Devereaux felt completely, utterly, and simply free. The 6 months that followed, the gala of the Great Collapse, as the tabloids had dubbed it, were not a quiet recovery. They were a controlled demolition and a ground-up reconstruction. For Gregory Lawson, the fall was as fast as it was brutal. The abyss he had dangled over Lena had opened beneath his own feet. We find him not in a penthouse, but in a cramped, fluorescent-lit office in a Queens strip mall, the air smelling of stale coffee and desperation. The view from the smudged window was of a parking lot and a discount tire store. His new lawyer, a public defender in a suit that looked slept in, slid a piece of paper across the particle board desk. "They're offering a plea, Greg. It's the best I'm going to get for you, the lawyer said, his voice flat. Devereaux's people are thorough. The SEC is buried in a mountain of evidence your own innovations provided. Wire fraud securities, fraud embezzlement of corporate funds. They've got you on everything. Everything, Gregory whispered. He'd lost 30 pounds. The arrogant, preening man from the gala was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed ghost. What does it mean? It means you plead guilty, you show remorse, and you get 5 to 7 years, the lawyer said, not looking up from his file. You go to trial. You'll be making parole applications when you're 60. Devereaux's lawyers won't just win, Greg. They'll make an example of you. You tried to build an empire on a Devereaux's money. You're lucky they're not asking for treason. 5 to 7 years. Gregory choked. That's my life. That's what's left of it, the lawyer said, finally looking at him. Sign the paper, Greg. Gregory thought of Lena. He had tried to call, dozens of times. He'd left frantic, sobbing messages from burner phones. He'd sent emails. All had vanished into a digital void. The penthouse he'd discovered in the most humiliating way possible by having his keycard declined had been in her name. The accounts he'd thought were his were joint, and Josephine's legal team had frozen them, seizing back every dollar he had stolen, every expense he had faked. He had tried the press, of course. In one last, pathetic gasp of narcissism, he'd contacted a gossip reporter, trying to spin a tale of a deceitful, gold-digging wife who had trapped him. The reporter had laughed at him. The video of him mocking Lena, followed by Josephine's surgical takedown, had been viewed over 200 million times. He wasn't a villain. He was a meme, a global punchline, a cautionary tale told in business schools. He picked up the pen. His hand, once steady enough to command a boardroom, was shaking. As for Bianca, she had pivoted with the predatory instinct of a shark. The day after the gala, she sold her tell-all, a wildly fabricated story of how she too was a victim of Gregory's web of lies for a meager sum. The check had bounced, but the infamy was enough. The last anyone saw of her, she was a mid-season replacement on a minor reality TV show, The Real Housewives of Secaucus. Her face a little tighter, her voice a little shriller, still desperately grasping for the relevance she had touched for a single fleeting evening. But this story was never about them. It was about Lena. The boardroom of Devereaux Holdings on the 80th floor of a skyscraper overlooking Central Park was the antithesis of the gala. It was silent minimalist and flooded with natural light. The long, imposing table was made of a single continuous piece of reclaimed Wyoming redwood, its surface polished to a mirror finish. It was a table built for substance, not for show. At its head sat Josephine, and to her right, in the seat of the newly appointed co-chair of the Devereaux Foundation, sat Lena. The transformation was breathtaking. The tiredness that had clung to her like a shroud was gone. Her hair was cut in a sharp, stylish bob that framed a face alive with purpose. She wore a crimson power suit, her eyes bright and focused. She was not the woman who had been humiliated at the gala. She was the woman who had been forged in its fire. The final liquidation of Lawson Innovations is complete. A man in a crisp suit reported, his voice echoing slightly in the vast room. After the SEC fines and creditor settlements, Mr. Lawson's personal assets are officially zero. The intellectual property was, as you suspected, negligible. Good, Josephine said, her voice neutral. Wipe it from the books. A failed experiment. And Ms. Lawson, the man said, turning to Lena with a deference Gregory had never afforded her. The national rollout of Lena's Kitchen is proceeding ahead of schedule. The flagship store in Soho opens next week. The press is ecstatic. Vogue is calling you the billionaire baker who beat the bully. Lena smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. I'm not a fan of the title, but I am a fan of the result. Let's move on. The foundation. She stood, and the room's entire focus shifted to her. She commanded it not with volume, but with a quiet, unshakable confidence. The Devereux Foundation for Women in Business has been officially chartered, she announced, her voice clear and strong. My mother and I have endowed it with its first $50 million. She paused, letting the number land. This is, as some of you know, the exact sum of the rescinded grant from the Metropolitan Gala. A quiet murmur of approval went around the table. My mission for this foundation is personal, Lena continued. We will be seeking out the simple ideas, the hobbies, the small women-owned businesses that are being overshadowed by louder, flashier, male-dominated competitors. We are not just investing money. We are investing belief. We will fund the women who are told to stay grounded while their male counterparts are praised for flying high. We will provide the capital, the legal framework, and the mentorship to ensure that their foundations are built on granite, not on sand. I want to fund the women who are told they belong at home so they can go out and own the building. The applause was real. It was a sound of deep respect. Later that day, Lena was not in the boardroom. She was in Soho at the new flagship location of Lena's Kitchen. The space was beautiful, all exposed brick, warm copper, and the intoxicating smell of fresh bread and cardamom. She was wearing jeans and an apron, a light dusting of flour on her cheek. She was laughing with her new head pastry chef, tasting a new matcha and yuzu creation. She was a CEO. She was a baker. She was, for the first time, wholly and completely herself. That evening, she and Josephine stood at the massive floor-to-ceiling window of the Devereux Holdings office. The city glittered below them, the same carpet of diamonds she had once viewed from her penthouse prison. Now it looked different. It wasn't a wall. It was a map. He tried to call me again, Lena said quietly, not taking her eyes off the view. From the correctional facility, his lawyer passed on a message. He said he was sorry. Josephine sipped her coffee, her expression unreadable. He's not sorry he did it, Lena. Lena turned. He's sorry he got caught. Exactly, Josephine said, a flicker of a smile playing on her lips. Regret is for the sin. Remorse is for the consequence. He only feels the latter. Lena nodded, the last lingering ghost of her old life finally evaporating. She no longer felt anger or even pity. Just closure. I don't know if I ever thanked you, Mum, Lena said, her voice thick with emotion. For all of it. For letting me try to do it on my own. For letting me make my own mistakes. And for being there when the mistake was too big to fix alone. Josephine put her arm around her daughter, pulling her close. My love, you did do it on your own. You built a successful business. You endured an impossible man. You found your strength even when you thought it was gone. I just turned on the lights so you could see the stage. Lena leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. She looked down at the city, at the endless, sprawling web of lights and lives, and she finally understood. Gregory had tried to make her a footnote in his story. He had tried to call her a simple rock, a prop to make him look better. But he had been wrong. She was not a rock. She was the mountain. She was no longer a simple woman or a victim, or a wife. She was Lena Devereaux, co-chair of the Devereaux Foundation, CEO of Lena's Kitchen, and master of her own fate. She was no longer a supporting character in someone else's fraudulent life. She was writing her own script, and she was just getting started. The moment Josephine Devereaux took that mic, it wasn't just a husband's life that was ending. It was a wife's life that was beginning. Lena was reminded that her value was never ever determined by the man who refused to see it. It was determined by her character, her strength, and as it turned out, her multi-billion-dollar inheritance. Gregory learned the hard way, never ever underestimate the simple woman sitting next to you. You might just be a guest at her mother's party. What did you think of Lena's revenge? Was it the perfect act of karma? Or was it too brutal? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one. If you love stories where karma comes knocking, make sure to like this video. Share it with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to the channel for more real-life drama. You won't want to miss what we have coming next.